And he gets this jarring wake-up call, and he says, this does not align with anything I know about my institution. So being who he is and where he is, he has access to everything. He goes and he does a quick study and he dives in and he goes, what the hell have I been funding? This is not the institution I thought I was funding. And then he broadens his view beyond his issue. And he's like, what has happened to this? This institution has nothing to do with the place, not only that I loved when I went to college and grad school here, but that I thought I was raising money for all these years.
Hello, Colemanators. Welcome back once again. Today, we're going to talk to an old friend of ours, Bruce D. Abramson, the everything guy. Bruce wears so many hats, and he wears them with such remarkable aplomb. He has most recently been the director of new student and graduate admissions at the New College of Florida. Fellow of the Coalition for America. He writes books. He does things with numbers. He spent an inordinate amount of time in academia. And I wanted to talk to him today, and he was graciously agreed to talk about what the hell is going on. Is there any hope? You know, because people often ask me if I think there's any hope in the culture war in general and with education and higher education. And I haven't been involved in higher education since 1988, when I got my terminal degree. Bruce, on the other hand, found his way back to the academy. Bruce, how you doing?
Good. I'm hanging in there, looking at a shattered industry, but
it is. So, what do you think? Give me your elevator spiel on why we should care about this.
All right. We are in an education crisis from top to bottom. I have been, as you mentioned, I've been focused on higher ed. And basically, in the early 90s, I came to believe that higher ed was a hollow shell of an industry. By the early 90s, I looked at it and I thought they don't do anything well. There are, at all levels, by the way, and this, by the way, I believe is true of all major American institutions. There are pockets of excellence. There are deeply committed, wonderful people who actually do conform to the mission statements and what you think is going on. You're lucky if you find them. And they are usually, sometimes they are pointed to as examples of what we could be, but across the board, they have no influence in anything. I mean, they have their own little spheres. They're allowed to work. But looking at higher ed in the early 90s already, I thought, by and large, doesn't educate well, doesn't do good research. It's completely inefficient. It's not training character. Don't know what we're doing. And I thought, I wonder how long it's going to be before anybody else notices. My view in the early 90s, I kept comparing higher ed to American autos or steel in the late 60s, which is basically phenomenal reputation. Everybody knew they made the best products in the world. You were lucky if you could own a couple of shares of their stock. And yet, in under a decade, they imploded because, in fact, they were hollow shells coasting on brand equity.
But of course, here you have the fallacy. Here you have with steel and automobiles. You had quasi-market forces at work. Here you have the fallacy of the nonprofit and the ridiculous government distortion of how the economics of higher education, which I noticed that you twice used the word industry to refer to the.
Oh, absolutely.
Chandra. Yeah. So
now here's the thing. So it was about 25 years before anybody else, before people really started to notice. And that was when I knew that I had a chance to get back in. But I will say one of the things one of the things that I didn't know, I can't say I was surprised, but I didn't know because it hadn't been my focus, was that when I got back in and I started talking to college professors, people teaching around the country, I have discovered an astounding consensus that student preparedness, that the quality of the students arriving on college campuses took a nosedive somewhere in the early 2010s. I know some people will tell me it was, 2010 to 2015, but somewhere in the early 2010s. And then it fell off a cliff following COVID. So you can't blame that on the universities. That's K to 12 education is doing a dismal job. And if their arrival coincided with the early 2010s, you're talking about really going back to close to the year 2000 when you had that collapse. So we've got an education crisis at all levels in this country. Nothing is done well. The students arrive completely unprepared, and the industry is broken. We can talk about why it's broken and how it's broken, but it's broken.
So let's talk about how it's broken. I think you just said it doesn't do anything right. Is there something? I mean, I suppose to some extent, I mentioned the economic forces. The failure, I guess there's sort of an internal externality here. The failure is not visited on the institutions themselves, with a few exceptions. It's visited on the customers who overpay for an abysmal product, and then have no recourse whatsoever against the institutions that sold it to them.
Well, that's actually not quite true. Colleges are failing all across the country, and they have been for quite some time. The thing is, they're not the colleges you heard of. They're not the ones. Okay, I remember when I was in college, I was at Columbia, and we used to tease friends. I had friends who were in places like Brooklyn College or Queens College, and we used to kid them because I was at Columbia and another guy was at NYU. And then I think I was still in college. I read that there were something like 120 colleges and universities in the New York City area. And I looked at it and I thought, okay, so if you rank order them, I'm at number 1 of 120, and the guys I'm ragging on are at number 6 of 120. Okay, maybe gain a little perspective and recognize that the vast majority of colleges, the vast majority of college students are places I haven't heard of and I haven't thought about. And this is one of our problems, that we operate in this rarefied world where, the space of colleges and universities is very small. In fact, it's huge. And once you get outside our rarefied environments, I do this when I talk to people about admissions. There's a lot of work going on now. People are concerned about discrimination in religion, in admissions, right? Whatever it is, I want more Black students. I want more athletes. Point is, I hadn't known this, but most colleges in the country are like most businesses in the country. Okay. When they see a potential applicant, they don't say, is this someone I want? They say, please come spend your money here.
Right.
Okay.
You learn that you learn that when you take the SAT,
yeah.
And also you start getting invitations from places you never heard of.
Right.
Trying to convince you that even though you had your eye on other places, these are the places that desperately want your money. And then I'm talking about in the days of $10,000 comprehensive fees.
Sure. Sure. But so it's not really accurate to say that the industry isn't suffering. The industry is suffering terribly. It's that we've got this elite strata, which is what people care about and people talk about, and they're not suffering.
Well, I think it's fair to say they're. I think of that stratum as having two strata within it, which is the elite private colleges,
yep,
and state schools,
right? Which that. But by the way, if you want, everybody knows when I say colleges have been going out of business. Well, first of all, I think everybody understands that means private colleges are going out of business, right? And then it's the small private liberal arts colleges. Okay, it's the ones that have lovely campuses with woods and late 19th and early 20th century buildings, and an alumni base that may love the place but hasn't made bank to donate 9 figures a year. And those are the ones that are going out of business. But we've also got problems at the top. West Virginia University, which is the flagship of a state. Okay. Now, you may not have a ton of listeners from West Virginia, and we may like telling jokes about it. But at the end of the day, the flagship university of any state is a very important college. And on a list of important colleges in the country, that makes it. And they got hit with this.
And that's a private institution?
No. That's the flagship state university.
Okay. And they're facing a problem?
Oh, yeah. They had huge problems, huge budget crunches. I have a friend, in fact, who spent her career as an English professor there. And I called her to ask about it because I read articles about it. And she told me she chose to take early retirement in order to allow the department to keep on some of her junior colleagues. Okay, that's how bad it was. They devastated many of their departments. And actually, this is a story. I mean, I'm not up on the details. I'm not a West Virginia guy. But it is almost certainly the most important institution and by far the largest public institution in this country to hit near educational institution to hit near collapse. And it's an underappreciated story. But basically what happened, okay, and this is this goes to the heart of one of the reasons that the industry is so broken. Okay. And let me say, people like talking about outrages. If you get a conversation going about academia in America, it's just one outrage after another. And by the way, it doesn't matter what side of the political spectrum you're on, and it doesn't matter what your issue is. There are enough horror stories to go around, right? Problem, I believe, fundamentally, if you can see it, this is true of anything, if you can see it, it's a symptom.
Right.
And we have to address the symptoms because the symptoms will make us uncomfortable and will bother us day to day. But you got to remember, a symptom emerges because of an underlying disease. Okay?
Right.
Whatever outrage most offends you about what's going on in today's university system, the gender madness, the indoctrination, the communism, the anti-Semitism, they're there because some internal underlying system produced those phenomena. So you got to look at the underlying system. When you look at an underlying system, another thing I believe people don't focus on, every institution, every organization is what the people working on the inside make it. I don't care what your mission statement is. I don't care what your CEO says your company's about. I don't care what the board announces. I care how you motivate your internal workers. I care I care how you motivate people. Now, from an institutional perspective, we can talk about the academic incentives in a minute. Institutionally, suppose you're outrunning a big university. Why should I have all the fun? You're outrunning a big university.
Thank you. I always wanted to be a millionaire.
Okay. You're not. So you're outrunning a big university. Okay. And you want to have a lot of money to dole out. You want to turn this, and as most administrators do, you want to turn this to a place that's comfortable for you and your friends. You like having a lot of nice programs. You like building the prestige. You want to have a lot of money to dole out. Well, the only way you get money is if someone gives it to you. Got to come from somewhere. But now there's a problem. You're a nonprofit, right? So, okay. All right. You're a nonprofit and you want a lot of money, but it would look bad and you'd get in trouble if you were actually too profitable.
Okay.
If Google stands up and says, we made a 2,000% profit last year, everybody says, what a great company, I want to own a share. If Yale stands up and says, we made a 2,000% operating profit last year, somebody says, we're re-examining your nonprofit status. I'm not donating money anymore. Your tuition is too high.
Right.
So you got a problem.
Right.
You want more money coming in, but you can't show obscene operating profits. What do?
You say that you're a nonprofit. and you call that you put money into something called an endowment, and you're going to, in theory, the endowment is going to be the source of your income for the rest of the time.
Mm,
And meanwhile, you develop programs.
but what you do, what
I'm
you
just guessing. I'm
want.
not claiming.
Okay, so here's why that doesn't work. That works if you get a donation directly into the endowment, but an operating profit, right, which is the money that you really
Okay.
dole out, an operating profit.
Well, explain, Bruce. All right, so explain, how does a university generate an operating profit?
Okay, well, they have money coming in. They have money coming in from grants. They have money coming in from tuition. They have money coming in. Most universities, particularly ones with nice buildings, you want to hold a wedding there on a weekend. Uh, I got a film crew that wants to come through. You get rental fees. There are a lot of things that you can do because you have a lot of assets. This is how you get your operating profit. So all the revenues coming in, right? You sell merch for your football team,
right? Or if it's a big state school, you sell tickets to the games.
Sell tickets,
TV rights,
all sorts of things. But here's the thing: if I want my profit, if I want to have more cash at my disposal, I want my revenues to go up, and it's unseemly to show big profits. Well, a little bit of math and a little economics tells you the only thing I can do is increase my costs. Now, this is actually a model that was developed in the world of regulated utilities.
Right.
And the all-time champion of this was Ma Bell when they had the telephone monopoly. And Ma Bell worked with the FCC, and the FCC, and every year they had a meeting as to what our rates can be. What can we charge consumers for the telephones? And the FCC had a rule. You can show an 8% profit. That's fair.
Well, so therefore, so you got to move the floor.
You got to move the floor. And AT&T was known for things like, hand-carved mahogany desks for receptionists. Right? I had friends working at Bell Labs. It's like, yeah, go ahead and order the wine list from room service.
So this is why we learn in economic theory that a monopoly strives, it maximizes its revenue by maximizing output, because the more things you can sell at a guaranteed profit, you have no incentive whatsoever to lower costs.
Right. So
and utilities are supposed to be a regulated version of that.
Yeah. So universities operate the same way. They're not regulated utilities, but regulated utilities and nonprofits, for similar reasons, cannot show significant operating profits. It would be bad for their reputation and their ongoing business model. Right? So you got to raise costs. Now, how do universities raise costs institutionally? There are a lot of ways, but there are two great tricks that everybody uses. Okay. The first one is capital donations. So here you are running a university, and I say to you, Ron, I just made a killing. I am going to donate a stadium. You say, thank you very much. What have I done? What have I done you a favor? Well, maybe, because you know what I didn't donate? Maintenance, upkeep, staff. Okay. You don't invest in any of those things. Pretty soon your stadium is going to look like the Colosseum in Rome. Okay. So every building that I donate increases your future operating budget, because buildings go on the capital budget and they're donated, and I like them because they get my name on them.
But you don't get any benefit from paying for janitorial services and repairs and utilities.
Exactly. So that's one scam. Now, the second scam is
so explain how that. So in other words, that model works for the donor, because the donor gets his name, and the administration gets the building and the prestige that comes with it, the building, and the catalog power that comes from kids. Don't you want to study molecular biology in the shiny new building? And it gets the other advantage that you and I, as normal economic actors, would not think of as an advantage of. Here's a way for us to spend more money out of our operating budget, or to add to our operating budget.
That's right.
Okay.
So that's one great trick. Okay, which is why everybody loves it when buildings get donated, because it increases my operating budget, increases my costs going up. The second thing is administrative bloat.
Okay? Oh gosh.
Okay. The nicest thing you can do to the university is pass a new regulation. Pass a new regulation. The university says, how dare you regulate us like that? We're going to have to hire 6 to 10 new administrators to take care of that.
All female.
So administer, and this is why, I mean, there's an often cited statistic that around the country, there are more people employed in higher education administration than there are on faculty. Right? Because this is great. Okay. And what's more, unlike faculty who are a pain in the ass because they're tenured and you can't fire them, in theory, you can fire all your administrators, which means that you have more control over them. Okay. Fireable employees are more easily controlled than non-fireable employees as a class, not at the individual level. So, all these administrators, and now you look at some of the questions like, well, why does everybody have these enormous DEI bureaucracies? Turns out there are 2 ways you could get to a DEI bureaucracy. You could have a meeting where someone says, hey, let's get into DEI. And everybody goes, that's a great idea. And then this bureaucracy grows around it. Or you could have a meeting where someone says, we need more bureaucrats. It's good for our business model. What are we going to have them do? How about DEI?
So when we learn that colleges have just renamed their DEI departments as togetherness departments, we shouldn't necessarily think they're trying to sneak DEI past us. They might be, but we have to understand that firing bureaucrats you already have is unthinkable for these administrators.
Right. Now you go to them and you say, you're not paying enough attention to anti-Semitism. And the first thing they say is that's outrageous, or, they defend themselves. But eventually, where do they always come out? What are they going to do to combat anti-Semitism?
Hire someone.
Hire someone to combat anti-Semitism. We're going to put in a whole office to combat anti-Semitism.
And we're going to staff it with Palestinians.
Well, that's second.
That's not this conversation. I understand.
That's a feel-good gloss on it. Okay, but that's always the solution to everything. Always here's something you're doing wrong. First, we'll have the faculty look into it and write a study. Then we'll hire outside consultants to write a study. And by the way, we need more funding for it. And then we will put in place a new bureaucracy for which we'll need more funding.
And donors aren't onto this.
Donors, here's how. This is my working theory. I've presented this in front of multiple audiences, and so far everybody has agreed with me, but I can't say there's any study behind it. Here's my theory of how people think about colleges and universities. You're somewhere 16 to 18 years old and you show up and you're a freshman at college. And you're on this campus and it blows your mind. And you fall in love with the place and you make lifelong friends. A couple of years later, you graduate and you're kind of bummed because, you're not on campus anymore. And anytime you're anywhere near your college, you go and hang out. And about 4 or 5 years after that, you're starting to feel a little bit old. You don't know anyone there anymore. All your places, if they haven't gone out of business, they've got new decor. It's not your space anymore. And you drift away. And you don't think about it until your kid turns 16. And in the meantime, you're going through life. Your tastes change. You know, you go from your grandparents' used Chevy to a new Porsche. You change jobs a couple of times. You move around the country. You watch your church change. Your taste in food changes. You're not going for fast food anymore. You're going out to steakhouses. Everything around you changes, but you are confident that your college is exactly as it was 30, 35 years ago when you went.
So
Okay?
true. So true.
And you're giving money to it because it's such a wonderful place. And you're sure that this is the one thing that's constant. Okay? And until something jars you to look at it, you never revisit that. Now, we got to see this. So this is my theory of how most people think about colleges. And then you read an article that says, oh, the federal government to sue you. How dare they sue that place? It's a bastion of knowledge. Look how great it did at everything. You know, you have no idea. You're talking about what the institution was 30, 40 years ago. Now, we got to see this play out in real time at the highest levels with Bill Ackman. Huh? So Ackman was not only a Harvard guy, Ackman loved Harvard. Ackman gave Harvard hundreds of millions of dollars. He was on all their boards. He had access to everything. He never looked at anything. Okay? October 7th happens. He wakes up on October 8th and he sees these pro-terror mobs forming in Harvard, and the administration is kind of winking at him. And he gets this jarring wake-up call, and he says, this does not align with anything I know about my institution. So being who he is and where he has access to everything, he goes and he does a quick study and he dives in and he goes, what the hell have I been funding? This is not the institution I thought I was funding. And then he broadens his view beyond his issue, and he's like, what? What has happened to this? This institution has nothing to do with the place, not only that I loved when I went to college and grad school here, but that I thought I was raising money for all these years. Okay. Now that's shocking, right? You got a guy who really should be an insider, who's playing with huge sums of money, who would never be blindsided like that in any aspect of his professional life. Never. And yet, this was his passion project.
Right. They're donating based on an entirely emotional, and I have no trouble relating to that because that's how I felt. I mean, I have trouble relating to having money, especially that kind of money. But my feelings toward Princeton for the first 20 some odd years after I graduated were love. It was love. It had done so much for me, and it had been such a marvelous experience. And it was utterly unconnected to what, aside from a handful of faculty members who I managed to stay in touch with, unconnected to what it had become.
Yeah. So I might have been a little bit, maybe because I stayed in academia and I saw it and I concluded that the industry was broken. I loved Columbia when I was there. I mean, I got to stay. In fact, the reason I got 3 degrees from Columbia was when I finished the first one, I didn't want to leave. Just didn't want to leave. And I mean, I love Columbia. It sort of annoyed me on my way out the door. But, even 5 or 6 years later, I was talking to friends who were starting to donate money. And I get these alumni letters from them. And I kept saying to my friends, I don't understand why you're donating money to them. It's like, oh, we did this, we did that. I'm like, look, as far as I'm concerned, they were a vendor that offered a product at a price, and I paid the price, and I was extremely pleased with the product, and I'd be happy to recommend them. And I look at these alumni letters, and I'm thinking, how come I never pull something in from the mail that says, we're writing to you from the Coca-Cola bottling company. Think about all the wonderful experiences in your life, the Thanksgiving dinners, the holidays with your family, your college commencement. Coca-Cola was there for all of them. Wouldn't you like to donate us money? And I'm like, no, I wouldn't. I'll buy another Coke.
Right. Okay. All right. So yes, it's different. It's a different. Somewhat. It's obviously a different channel. How much when we talk about, going back to your original statement, the industry is broken. How much attention should we focus on the top 20 institutions in the country that are, it seems to me, from an economic point of view, they're going to have to be treated separately because they're wealthy enough and there's enough of both that emotional bond of the Bill Ackmans writing blank checks, or they're so awash in patent licensing fees that they're always going to be able to subsidize whatever crap they want to pull off, unless and until there's some kind of legal status change.
Absolutely. You look at these places with the huge endowments, and at the end of the day, unless you want to change our entire economic model and start confiscating endowments, they can ride out whatever we throw at them. Okay, there's no, there is no. So they'll have a couple of bad years. They'll have a couple of bad years. The brand name. I mean, we see how valuable brand equity is. The New York Times is still writing on the fact that it was a great newspaper in the 19th and 20th centuries. I mean, brand equity is tremendous, and it dissipates very slowly. Yes.
Well, it can dissipate very fast. I do a lot of commentary about Disney and about about the brand equity that they have squandered over the last 10 years alone.
Yeah. I think I read one of your pieces on that.
But when you talk about these multi-hundred-year institutions, which in American life is forever,
right?
That's forever. Yeah, that brand equity.
Yeah, most of the Ivies are older than the country.
And yet, despite all this, there was this incredible moment a couple of weeks ago where a corner seemed to be turned by the Ivy League schools that said, remember what we said about no more SATs?
Mm-hmm.
That forget it. You're going to have to take the SATs. I guess they can't get away totally with anything forever, huh?
No, they can't. And I mean, they never could. Right. And nobody ever could. I mean, it's.
You can fool some of the people some of the time, or all the people some of the time.
Trends change, but the point is that their endowments are so big that they can also at some point cut operations and just become hedge funds.
Well, yes, that's right.
Right. I mean, basically, sell off most of the campus, keep a couple of buildings, taking 1,000 students a year, make them pay full tuition, and just invest your endowment, and you can last for a very long time like that. But then all right. So then there's the other problem. That's why the universities themselves are so bad. Then there's the academic incentive structure, and this is something I think we've spoken about in the past because I've written about this, because this is really what produces most of the visible outrages, and that is that. Sure, at some point you were in college, not you, but you had a friend who said, "Oh, look, I just write what the professor wants to hear on the exam, and I'll get an A," and they got good at it, and they got A's. Right? You heard that? We all heard.
Absolutely.
Well,
I never got good at it because I kept insisting on saying what I really thought.
Yeah, it's funny. I had an unusual problem, which is that I was always a methodologist. Now I wanted to be a radical, so I flocked to all the radical professors, and they'd give these speeches, and basically my reaction was, "That was terrific. That was terrific. I want to be where you are. I like everything you're saying, but I don't understand how to get from point A to point B. Could you please show me the path?" And then they'd get mad at me.
Because they couldn't really show you the path.
They couldn't show me the path.
Because the methodology wasn't there.
Well, it's basically, so here's the answer. You know how you get from point A to point B?
I say so.
Okay, no, there's no bridge. There's no path. It is literally what you call a leap of faith.
And that's why they're all Marxists.
Well, because that's where their faith is. But effectively, that is the academic incentive structure from top to bottom. Right? There are versions of it that tell you you're in grad school. How do you pick a topic to impress the professors? How do you get ahead once you get a professorial position? You build upon the work of those who came before them. The best way to flatten an academic, your work is brilliant. It was what drew me to this field. Your last paper was amazing. I saw some things you left hanging at the end, and I just spent 2 years of my life trying to come up with answers. I'm hoping you'll take a look at them. Okay? I think you'll find,
but at least those are conversations. They might not be entirely sincere, but they're at least talking about the subject matter to some extent, right?
Well, they're not talking about the subject matter. And what that does is it does two things. One is it anchors me, the junior person in the field, and it flatters the people in the field, and it tells them I'm the one they want to promote, right? But the other thing that it does is it says, I will take whatever direction the field is already moving and move it a half step further. And when you have fields, and what that means is, so if we start, here is a core of reality. And the point is, there are interesting questions in that direction and in that direction and in that direction. Any direction you pick, there's interesting stuff to do. But once I've picked a direction, if I keep moving in the same way for decades, I end up at a tangent very badly removed from reality. And so, you can see, we can start with the interesting question of, I noticed that we've always studied history from the perspective of the victors and the conquering armies and nobles and kings. What if we thought about the peasants who were conscripted, the villages that were sacked along the way, the women who were left behind? Those are fascinating questions. We absolutely should be looking at more of. But you can see how, if you keep going down that path for 70 or 80 years, you end up with the nuclear family as a tool of oppression. Okay. And you can draw the path, and of course, everything builds upon what came before it. It's because nothing ever snapped you back to reality. Now, when you have things like engineering or medicine or law, you can really only go nuts for a decade or so before something snaps you back to reality. But in the humanities, the social sciences, nothing is ever going to snap you back.
That's right, 100%.
I mean, as far as I can tell, the last reality-based correction we had to our thinking about the humanities and social sciences that was serious enough to order a redirection was the total collapse of Western civilization between about 1914 and 1945. We came at it asking new questions, fundamentally new questions. And that was where we set the initial directions for our humanities and social sciences fields. And they've just been going there. And everybody says, oh, well, it has to be to the left. And I'm like, no, it was tilted slightly to the left, which was fine. And then it went crazily to the left. But the last time we had a university system with comparable internal incentives, we had a slightly different set of initial conditions or inputs. And we ended up with a bunch of Nazis running Germany's finest universities in the world. So it doesn't have to be to the, now, of course, we know that that's also to the left, but it's a different left.
Right. Again, I started off before, didn't start off I said, okay, we've got these elite institutions. They're going to run on their own power for the foreseeable future. Well, we both pointed out they're not completely immune to market pressure, but that's, like I said, 20 institutions, and they're I'm just using 20 as a shorthand. Right. They have outsized influence and impact on American society, socially, economically, fine. But meanwhile, majority of people who are in higher education are in the other hundreds of schools.
Right.
What's going to happen there? More are going to close.
More of them are going to close. Look, the whole, we are at the cusp. We are still at the dawn of the information age. Okay. We don't know One of the interesting things I discussed with colleagues is we have students coming in, they don't read. Today's kids don't read.
Don't read. You don't mean they can't read. They don't read. They know how to read, but they don't read.
They
Reading is
don't
not
read.
part of their. It's not something they do with their time.
Now, maybe you were like me, okay? You were the odd kid who could read 15 books over the summer. Most kids didn't read, but they read two. Right? Right. The kids today, they don't read. They don't make it through a whole book. What's the last, what, ask a bunch of college students, what was the last book you read that was not assigned to you by anybody else? They don't have one. They can't even remember back that far. They don't read. But now here's the interesting thing that I realized. We think reading is how you learn stuff. Right? But in fact, history is long. Okay? For about the past 500 years, we have been in a text world. Only after Gutenberg invented the printing press did we enter a text-based society. What was written over the years? I mean, prior to, you had the sudden explosion of writing. You had novels, you had poems and all kinds of stuff. More than 500 years ago, what was written around the world? Well, you had a lot of scripture. You had a lot of contracts. Maybe you had a couple of stories that were considered foundational, the sagas, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Yal Saga, Gilgamesh, but very few.
Beowulf. Don't forget Beowulf.
Okay, Beowulf. Very, very, very few. Right? There wasn't that much stuff that was written. Most people didn't know how to read. The Chinese, okay, people who don't like the West will be quick to tell you, the Chinese invented movable type before Gutenberg, which they didn't catch on. Why? No killer amp. I've got this printing press, which is, still might be cheaper, might be less expensive than a room full of monks, but it's still pretty expensive to operate. It's a huge capital investment. Nobody knows how to read. I got a China full of illiterate peasants.
Right.
I say to them, if you learned how to read, I could print books for you. They say, what's written that I should know how to read?
But also, they're both in Asia and in Europe. People are mostly living subsistence lifestyles. Reading
Right.
is a leisure activity for most people.
So at about the same time that Gutenberg invents the printing press, Martin Luther comes up with this wacky idea of the vernacular Bible. Now, all of a sudden, if I can learn how to read in my language, I can access God's word directly. That's a killer app.
Okay.
Okay. But the point is that this ushers in the entire notion of text-based education and learning and communication. Before that, and you know this from Talmudic study, people memorized stuff. They memorized scripture, they memorized the Talmud, they memorized poetry, they memorized saga. The primary method of information, of communication, of education was storytelling and memorization. Those are not text-based. We completely altered stuff. You read about things from centuries past and you think, oh, they had this encyclopedic knowledge. It was like, no, that was the way they studied.
Right.
We read a book and we look for the themes, for the ideas. What were they saying? What was this? You go see a movie, somebody says to you, what's it about? You paraphrase the whole thing. Okay? That's a radically different method of taking it in and recommunicating it. Now, maybe we're done with the text-based era. Maybe we're moving into a video and audio era. The problem is we don't have the tools for that yet. Maybe in 200-300 years, we will have ways of educating and communicating and conferring knowledge and passing down traditions using videos that are far superior to anything that we experienced with texts. Thing is, it's going to be a while before we figure out what they are. So we're at this mismatch where the technologies that are favored by today's young and by today's not so young, the technologies that dominate us, we don't really understand how to use effectively. And we're very far away from figuring that out. So we're in a very dangerous transition because we're not transmitting. We no longer know how to transmit. I was stunned when I got back to campus. I discovered today's kids don't know the basic Bible stories. They don't know the classical stories. They barely know the fairy tales. We literally no longer have a common culture. They don't know the classic movies. I mean, who here has seen Wizard of Oz? Gone with the Wind. I mean,
okay. So now so now you're talking about education. This is not just education. This is acculturation. In other words, they're not growing up in homes where they are exposed to these things.
Well, education is supposed to be more than skill acquisition. Okay, right. And I'm not talking about welders and pipe fitters, but basically, number crunchers, right? If I get an advanced college degree to become an accountant, that's skill acquisition. Now, if I get a liberal arts degree along the way and I learn how to read the great books, that's an education in which you picked up a skill. But there's skill acquisition and there's education, and we're not educating. We are not a well-educated population anymore.
So are you saying that things are going to sort of have to shake out until we understand how the culture and the technology are going to gel for the next generation?
Yeah, education, I predict that within a decade, higher education writ large will not be recognizable to anyone who set their expectations since World War II.
And people I think the feedback from the market, from the people, government did a terrible disservice to everyone involved, except the people who got to live in those big houses on those leafy campuses, by pumping up the cost of college attendance with irrational non-market-based loan guarantees. Even given that, people realize now it's insane to borrow that kind of money for what they're getting.
Right. Well, okay. So let me utter a sentence you will not hear me say in many different contexts. Joe Biden was right.
Yes. Yes, okay. He was.
Joe Biden was right when he said that student loans were a hoax, and that the 17-year-olds who signed these things going 6 figures in debt to want them for the rest of their lives and become debt slaves had no idea what they were doing.
Yep.
And there's some relief. Now, as is frequently the case with people on the left, their ability to diagnose underlying problems is far superior to their ability to propose workable solutions.
Right.
I've said this for years. Read Marx for his diagnostics. He actually understood what was wrong with 19th century capitalism. His solutions were catastrophic on a scale unrivaled in human history. There's not a problem with it. It was not bad. Biden's problem was not that he wanted to do something to relieve the debt burden. And it's not even the moral hazard argument. The real problem was his position was these kids were victims of a hoax. No one is responsible for having condom. No one will ever be held responsible. And we're going to keep the system in place so that as we relieve one guy today, we will ensnare another one tomorrow. That's nuts. Okay, that's nuts. If you said to me, you've got 10 minutes to put in place one change that will improve higher education, here's what it is. Okay. All student loans are guaranteed at the 50% level by the institution that receives them. Bam. That will ripple through everything. It will change the approach towards inefficiency. It will change the approach towards bureaucracy. It will get rid of the deadweight departments. It will change everything.
On that note, Bruce,
Yeah.
great talking to you. I think we could discuss this for hours and accomplish nothing. So we see how academically
That's what intellectuals do.
right. But at least we're not Marxists. We're not going to kill anyone in the process. Thank you so much for the culmination today. Great catching up with you. Please, maybe you'll find somewhere else to solve problems. It might not be on a college campus.
Yeah.
Thanks again, Bruce.
Thanks.